Hold on, this is not my first slide. There you go. Okay, good. Hi, everybody. So thank you for all the fascinating talks. I feel like a little bit of an exotic talk now, but we'll see whether I kind of resemble like something glittery or the orange ball from the Dark Star, but we'll see afterwards. Okay, so my talk is nervous systems, in brackets on chip, and I'm really a hardware person. I'm not doing functional languages or compilers or anything at all. So I build hardware, and I'm also looking at unconventional and neuromorphic hardware systems. Yeah. So when I was asked to basically come along and talk, so I thought like, oh, what am I going to tell all the functional languages guys? So I decided to do a bit of a dash through the history of all the platforms that we've designed and kind of the approaches that we developed. So hopefully enjoy something completely different. So first of all, where I'm coming from, in a way, so this is what you see on this slide is kind of what people think of as traditional computing hardware, mobile phones, data centers, Manchester Baby, and so on. And if you ask me what I think about, when I think about computers, I kind of think about systems like this. Yeah, I think about natural systems. I think about cellular automata, cells, slime molds, chemical reactions, dynamic systems. Yeah. So I'm very much an unconventional computing person. I have selected my classical computer architecture strand, though, to not go too wacky kind of today. So what I'm going to be talking about is about bio-inspired hardware, but it's going to be traditional technologies. I'm going to be talking about multi-reconfigurable systems, evolutionary hardware design optimization, and an application that we are looking at is kind of fault tolerance, and basically enabling adaptive hardware systems that can be autonomously fault tolerant. So this is going kind of way back. This is one of the first chips that I made, and it was made in an AMS, Austrian Microsystems Technology, 600 nanometers, and this was, we called it the silicon primordial soup. And we had a lot of fun with it, and what it is basically, it's a chip that has an array of 256 programmable transistors in the middle. So they're arranged in a checkerboard patterns, PMOSes, NMOSes, and you can upload a bit stream. Think like a breadboard for CMOS devices on a chip. So as I said, we had a lot of fun with it. So you can basically go in with a GUI, click your comparator together, and then kind of run it through a real-time FPGA-based system, and apply your input stimuli and so on. Have a lot of fun with it. But of course, how do you design anything meaningful in it? Yeah, it's a pain in the neck, basically. So what we've also did, and this is kind of a bit hinting at with the primordial soup, we were really exploring evolutionary algorithms to design circuits without any knowledge of circuits. I used to be a physicist in a different life, so I knew nothing about designing circuits, and that topic suited me quite well. So I knew how to develop algorithms. So this is kind of how I like to abstract computing hardware. So kind of this is us sitting at a desk. Oh, actually, no, pointers don't work on screens. So this is me sitting at a desk, and I can do some computation in the abstract, can use pen and paper, can use like a calculator, whatever. And then I have my favorite lump of material or computational substrate on the bench. And this is kind of the hardware at the bottom. As I said, these are kind of traditional computers, could be anything. But what I want to do is basically, I want to have like a formulation of my problem. And what I then need to do is I need to kind of somehow instantiate this in whatever my system is.
Your camera is not tracking.
It's only actually, is it not tracking me? No, it's tracking me. It is tracking me now, isn't it? Yeah. Good. So what I need to do is I need a way of instantiating my problem on my substrate. And the problem is with it that for every single substrate, you need a different way of doing this. And I would really love to have like a more unified way of doing this, because pretty much everything we always ever do is manual. So once you've mapped your problem onto the computer, you wait. Time goes by, the thing transitions from one state into the other, and then you need to kind of interpret the new state. So you need to decode the output. Then you get some sort of response or some sort of answer to your problem. And hopefully, if you have a good computer, then this is a very small epsilon to the right answer, that you then read from your computer. The issue with this kind of loop of, or the kind of commutative square of computation is that doing this may take a long time. Instantiation requires often high effort and is very difficult because you have to do it for every single computer that you conceive. In my case, with the FPGA, configuration may be non-obvious. It's known in this case, but if you have a more wacky substrate or biological system, then actually configuration may be unknown. This process may be prone to faults, and actually, if you then read out, it's again high effort and quite difficult to achieve. So one thing that we kind of found salvation in is evolutionary algorithms, because you don't have to know anything. You basically just, randomly create a bunch of configurations, call them parents. Then you introduce small changes. You create many copies of them, introduce small changes, cross them over, very much mimicking biological evolution. Then you put them on your hardware as a configuration bit string. Then you read the output. You check how big your epsilon is, and then you rank them, and then you throw away the bad ones, you keep the good ones, and you go around the circle. So basically, it may take a long time. We don't care because it's automated. High effort. We have configurable hardware in the loop. That is quick, so we only have to wait the time that H or P takes. Prone to faults. We make robustness part of the fitness. So he said nonchalantly, but of course, evolution is kind of exploiting every single thing that you kind of give it, but okay, it's not so easy. Configuration unknown, we can treat it as a black box optimization problem. Great. So this is a bit of a video that just a bit of eye candy. This is the computer running a GUI of interfacing with the FPGA chip. What I'm going to be doing is I have made some notes there, 2 minutes. There's something interesting is happening. So what you can see is the computer using the FPGA with the hardware in the loop, downloading configuration bit strings as per the EA or the GA. And the task is to evolve the NOR gate, right? Nothing super spectacular, but we want to do it from scratch at the transistor level on that chip. And as you can see at the moment, it's kind of not doing much. So something starts to happen as evolution progresses around 2 minutes. So then there is like a great discovery, hopefully that soon happens. There you go. So evolution has now found a random configuration that is not a boring straight line, and now it has a hook to actually work with something, yeah? To kind of twiddle bits, something changes, and then the fitness function can actually work. And you can see here the fitness kind of the error function, essentially in this case, comes down between the target behavior and what you currently measure from the chip. So let's fast forward to the second point here. We watched a lot of evolution TV, and of course, life's too short today. So what you can then see, things are kind of getting better. What you expect is kind of half the curves for like a step voltage to be all at 0 ideally, and half the curves basically doing this, implementing a NOR gate essentially. Yeah. So this was all very exciting. You can play with it, and you can kind of open a chip view. Could do manual design as well, but here you can see evolution ticking over and flipping over the transistors and downloading them on the chip. Yeah, lots of fun, but of course, lots of parasitic effects. I mean, if you want to make a transistor configurable, then you can't really change its size on the chip, so you have to make it somehow configurable, yeah? And basically meaning if you want to have 20 configurable transistors, you need to put 20 transistors, something like that, yeah? You can do some tricks with width, but here we go. So what we then wanted to do is kind of, we wanted to be a bit more large scale, yeah, and a bit more kind of meaningful in terms of applications. Then a kind of a problem in the VLSI world came along, which was on intrinsic variability. So intrinsic variability has always been there, yeah. So, but the magnitude, if you shrink technology, the magnitude of these stochastic variations is now basically no longer negligible. And what people are now care about is standard cell designers, circuit designers, technology designers, while we went from bulk to FinFETs for digital systems to reduce this kind of intrinsic noise or intrinsic variations. Then we made this chip, which was a programmable analog and digital array. So at the top level, it kind of behaves like an FPGA. You can use VHDL, map a logic circuit on it. But then underneath, you can actually tweak some analog properties. So parasitics are not quite as bad because we kind of made an educated choice of tweaking drive strengths of certain blocks, and tweaking drive strength and to basically cater for different fan outs while being optimal in terms of power consumption and variability. Because when you make things bigger, variability goes away. When you make things bigger, you pay with area, power, everything else. Yeah, so you don't want to make things bigger. So what we've done with this chip, we looked at kind of fault tolerance as well, because and you can do that at two levels. You can do it at the transistor level, combating variability mainly, or you could do it at the logic level, where you can essentially exploit symmetries because we have knowledge of the architecture. We can exploit symmetries, and you can actually apply simple swap functions in the case of an error that you encounter. And let's say if you swap, there is an error, let's say in this branch, and you swap it across here, then the configuration is kind of a, you can basically transform one into the other without changing the functionality, but you have circumvented the error. But just because you're not using this branch, you're not encountering the error. Yeah, and you can do that at runtime as well. So we've evolved repair strategies using evolution because we had the algorithms already, but you could probably do that a bit more formal as well. Another thing that we did is now at the low level, variability mitigation. So you had some level of dynamic sizing of the transistor, so you could kind of trade off power, performance, area. And in this case, what we've mapped is I think it was a D-type flip-flop. Yes, clock to Q, it must be. So D-type flip-flop. That cell is mapped, and now leaving that logic cell as a configuration of a function alone, but actually tweaking the underlying transistor sizes of the different components, you get kind of, if you put them on minimum size, you get a behavior that is kind of reflected in this kind of cloud. And if you basically, what you do in order to sample variability or the effect of variability, you move it into different places. Yeah, because every place on the chip will be affected differently by variability. You move it around, you measure, get a performance cloud. And what you can then do is, at each of these places, you can then tweak the transistors underneath and shift performance of this entire cloud into different regions. Yeah, so, and then you can basically see you've got here the minimum configurations, and you can see here you always have to kind of pay physics its due, because you can kind of, what you really want to be is down here. But of course, you can't basically break causality or physics. So you always have a trade-off. But what we showed is basically that you can make designs robust against variability, and as long as you're happy to make a trade-off that suits your application. Yeah, if that makes sense. You can sacrifice power for speed, and vice versa. This was another test that we did for kind of temperature controlled chamber. What we wanted to do is here basically test ring oscillators on the panel chip and VCOs. And why you may want to do that is for, let's say, if you want to put logic on the chip that does measurement circuitry, and you have to have really matching frequencies between two different oscillators on the chip. In this case, we basically first created a variability map, and you can see here, these are this is essentially the variability of the same ring oscillator instantiated at different places on the chip. And you can bring them all kind of back within a very similar frequency range by, again, using the underlying analog reconfigurable properties. So if you make transistors bigger, smaller, then you can change the frequency of these ring oscillators. Yeah, so you can homogenize across the chip. Then you can do something useful with it. Another thing that we did is, now this is not on the chip. This is cell mapping in the VLSI EDA flow. So we used like EDA tools, in this case Cadence. We used 65 nanometer TSMC process. And what we did is essentially, there is a process called cell mapping that the tools do. So you give them your circuit description in HDL, it compiles it down to a netlist, it then selects different drive strengths of the standard cells, then puts them together in long strips, arranges them in a square, and puts them on the chip. So what you find is basically, if you give the tool different random seeds, what you see here on the red curve is essentially what the tools achieve as kind of maximum optimization. And what we then did is use these as seeds and use the multi-objective optimization algorithm, and kind of we pushed performance a little bit further in those cases. Not major gains, but in some cases we got like 3-4%, which obviously if you really care about low power or you want to squeeze the last bit of speed, then that's a nice thing to do. What we then did in a different research project is actually looking at runtime management of distributed computing systems. So we didn't want to worry about the data center and building networks and stuff like that. So what we did is basically created in various projects a bunch of so-called many-core systems. So this one was kind of an early version. These golden chips here, they're called Trefzer. They're also custom-made. So they were 180 nanometer TSMC. Basically like a kind of a simplified FPGA fabric that we then put on a chip. Why did we do that? Because Xilinx decided at some point to no longer tell people which bit does what on their chips for obvious reasons. But of course, for us, it was not great because you can then not just use an EA and twiddle every single bit because you could blow up the chip. So made our own, so we could continue using EAs. Sounds really bad if I say it like that, but anyway, but of course this had no great performance and no great kind of logic space. So what we did is we created an overlay of a many-core system using kind of stripped down microblade processors on the Centurion, on the Xilinx Vertex 7, and we called it Centurion because we hoped to get 100 cores, but what we got was 64, but that's okay. So we could fit 64 on it. And in another project, we built something about more board level or rack level, and that was the Graceful project where we wanted to look at runtime management in the sense of running a bit more heavy workloads. So these were based on the Zinc 7020, but each node was kind of a Zinc 7020. So what we were looking at in terms of bioinspiration in this case, so we looked at social insect behavior. So why? Because social insects have a very kind of, now thinking about kind of getting into the realm of kind of nervous systems on chip that I promised you initially. So they have relatively small brains, only like 100,000 neurons, but they have behavioral abilities which are very basic, rule-based. They live in kind of large collectives and they manage complicated nests and they survive basically, and they're quite fault tolerant. So if you pour anything nasty on them, you kill them, half of them off, they come back. So that's what we want from our system as well. So we kind of create models of kind of pheromone emission, decision-making, threshold-based triggers that these guys react to. Yeah, and what ants or ant colonies in particular, and also bee colonies do, is they kind of, depending on their internal preferences, individuals' abilities, and their environment, they take on different preferential tasks. Yeah, so one ant that may be kind of a bit stronger than the other one is more prone to becoming like somebody who digs a tunnel, and another one who's maybe can smell a bit better is actually foraging food. So this is how it looks like in a kind of on an ant trail. So here they carry leaves, and you may think, oh, a little guy is building their nest with leaves, but no, what they actually do with their leaves is they take them into the nest, they kind of chew something up, and in their guts there is kind of some sort of fungus that they then inoculate the leaves with. So the leaves become like the humus. They grow this fungus, and the fungus is food. So it's actually quite cool in a way because it's a bit more complicated than you thought. Yeah, so promising when we want to use them to be inspired to build models. So this is now this mapped into a very simplistic model in a way, right? Where you're threshold based, and this is the Centurion platform. This is a visualization, but the data is from the FPGA. We gathered that. We ran dummy workloads of this kind of task graph, and at some point it's a very simple task graph, yeah, but at some point we knock out all task 3s, and here you can kind of see what's happening. We kind of run this video. It doesn't show me the time actually. I'm not sure how I'm doing. So you can see here, this is the initial kind of random kind of routing setup. So each one of these is a processing node and has kind of routes to a subsequent task. It's parallelized. This is why you have many of each task. And you can then see that when they flash, they can't process. then all task trees are knocked out, latency kind of shoots up, and then you can kind of see the remaining nodes kind of reallocating their tasks with this kind of ant-based model, and then kind of bringing latency back down over time. Yeah, so this is quite nice. So it's kind of a self-organizing behavior that is kind of emergent, yeah, because we did not basically take a global view, or the model has no global properties. Yeah, it has local properties from which this kind of self-organization emerges essentially. Yeah, you cannot get almost as good as you were actually, but it's a simple example. Yeah. Yep. So this now brings us an iteration further, because we thought like, okay, this is a behavioral model. What? Because we love ASICs, so we want to be more low level. So what can we do? We want to embed kind of an ant-like nervous system to detect faults at a very, very low level, directly in the logic, yeah, or whatever circuit. So we came across neural microcircuits, and here you can see this is a crayfish. And what is remarkable in this case about the crayfish is that it has in its tail, it has a neural microcircuit that can act autonomously from its brain. There is a reason for it. We have them too, actually, and they stop us from falling over. So no, honestly, because the latency between your brain, between your conscious brain and your feet, is actually too long for you to walk safely. And it is also too long for the crayfish to survive. So in the tail, there is this kind of very simple motif of a neural circuit, microcircuit, that senses the water movement, and it can actually, it has a threshold behavior. It can distinguish whether the ripples in the water come from wind, whatever, natural causes, or whether this is kind of some big, nasty, predatory thing approaching. And in which case, this microcircuit triggers the tail and propels the crayfish out of the danger zone. So that's what I want for my hardware systems as well. So basically, that's kind of this works. So how do we make them? Because we like evolutionary algorithms, because how the hell do you design them? And we didn't want to revert to kind of, you know, making little circuits and then use PyTorch to train them, right? We know this exists, but if you make models of that and you make then hardware models of that, they're going to be huge. Yeah, if you cannot. So the whole point about using microcircuits at the first layer of interface is that they have innate capabilities of detecting certain patterns of fault. Yeah, you don't want them to kind of have you don't want reconfigurable weights and things like that. Yeah, that makes it really big. So what we did here is basically we used evolutionary algorithms, but it has like a kind of a twist, which is this novelty search algorithm here. The reason we did this is because how many fault vectors do you have? How many things do you have to test in your hardware, right? I mean, who knows? I mean, of course, we could basically say, okay, yes, we care about this bit. We evolve a microcircuit to trigger on this bit. Great. But then that circuit would only be useful for this particular bit. So what we did is we built a whole database of microcircuits, and the novelty search algorithm takes care that not two microcircuits in this database behave the same. Yeah. So the hypothesis here is if you have a diverse behavior, and then let's say you have 100,000 microcircuits, then you analyze your system and you kind of then try them all, then you have a limited search space, then you can use like something like hill climbing to find the best one that detects faults for a specific scenario. Yeah. This has worked to an extent, but we're still working on it in parts. But so it has worked. Oh, this is kind of strange. This is, oh my God, somebody. It was not me putting animations in. So what we did is we built a test bed on FPGA again, because we want to put these microcircuits on FPGA, implant them in the hardware. What we use is a RISC-V CPU. You can, yeah, I mean, as you know, you can just download them VHDL. So one of the guys has written a script, essentially, so you can give it a list of signals that you want to monitor. We have different locations here. And then I mean, it's manual at the moment, right? I sound super automatic, so we're not automatic, but we have a tool that then once you've specified everything, implants those microcircuits into the netlist, and then you synthesize and put it on the FPGA. You're right. We are not using an old version. We're using a RISC-V. Yeah, I will edit this. Thank you very much. So we're looking at 3 different locations. So one is more like monitoring register file. The other one is looking into the ALU, and the third one is kind of looking at the memory bus, essentially. And so this is kind of course, we don't know what to expect. Yeah. So the question is now, how do you set up a kind of a, how do you set up a fault scenario for this? Yeah. So I'll show you this on the next slide. But before I do this, I show you how these microcircuits look like and how they respond. So this is also the work of one of a very nice student who made these lovely plots of these. These come out of the novelty search, and we then match them. So we then kind of introduce errors, and these were then found out of that database of 100,000 to basically match best to detect the types of faults that we had injected. Yeah. So and then you can see here these 2 microcircuits, and you can see in this case, this one latches on to a fault that occurred frequently. This one kind of to a fault that occurred more rarely. Yeah. So this is how they look like, and they, as you can see, they're really compact. They're kind of a bunch of neurons essentially, and the neuron being in hardware terms a counter and a bunch of shift registers, basically, so because we kind of cut down, but we don't have floating point precision, of course. Yeah. So what we then want to do afterwards is doing system level learning. So another kind of hat that I'm often wearing, but I didn't wear today too much, is resonant computing and in material computing systems. I told you about all the funky biological substrates in the beginning, and because obviously nobody knows the state, nobody knows how to instantiate a problem in them or read out a problem, what we are using is we're using an abstract model to kind of match their dynamics and interpret their outputs. And for this, we're using reservoir computing. And the idea here is, or the next step in this project will be to use the layer of microcircuits essentially dotted around in your circuit as feature extractors, or let's say output space enhancers, maybe in a certain way. And then more akin to like your actual brain, within a second layer that has actually learning capabilities or plasticity capabilities. We are planning to use reservoir computing approach basically to then interpret and identify or classify faults that come out of the system. So we've done an experiment where we've irradiated memory. So basically compile sorting algorithms and different workloads, put them in the SRAM, because SRAM is the biggest and most prone to radiation, basically randomly flip bits as the program executes, and then try to detect those with the microcircuits essentially. So that's currently ongoing work. Yep.
They're using an actual radiation source.
That would be great, actually. I was thinking finally having an excuse to apply for beam time, but no. Because of so again, like we wrote a script that basically just hooked it up to the much more powerful programming system of the zinc that we use, and then inject at runtime with the second port secretly sneaking it in. No, I would love to do that actually. I mean, there should not be a reason why it shouldn't work. But this is on my bucket list actually, to destroy an FPGA. I haven't done it yet. I should actually. Well, by non-brutal means, like I could whack it with a hammer, but that's not fun. So this is then leading up to this whole system picture. So this is ongoing work. We are 1.5 years or so into this particular project, and you can see here kind of the microcircuits, then small SNNs doing the fault classifications. This is what the resonant computing angle that I showed you, and the idea is really to then go from a system that looks like this to kind of a system that looks like this with a kind of a neuromorphic type overlay. The challenge, of course, is to make it low overhead. Yeah, so this is obviously the challenge. And one of the things why we are hopeful and kind of, I guess, the trump card we played when we applied for the funding is because in current systems the logic density is so high that actually if you could switch all transistors on a given silicon area at the same time, you would actually melt it. Yeah, so this is kind of known as dark silicon. This is why in the 2010s, 15s, we, hey, how about we go to multi-cores? We don't want multi-cores. We want one single, super fast, 100 gigahertz core, but we can't. Yeah, it will melt. So our excuse is that dark silicon exists, and hopefully we can squeeze into these gaps with these kinds of approaches and create inherently fault-tolerant systems. And that's me, and I hope I didn't overrun. Probably did.
So, any questions?
So how does the neural way of detecting faults compare to existing ones where you have tools take your ASIC design and then swap out like the flip-flop for scan the flip-flops and turn them into a big chain that you can just run information in and out of and check that is correct?
I mean, of course, you stab the dagger right through the heart, because that's going to be, we haven't done this comparison actually, quantitative. But so just to give you a bit of an idea, and I should have really brought some synthesis results actually. So the RISC-V by itself is really in a way tiny. And so if you dot around a few of these microcircuits, I mean, the overhead is currently, I think, of the microcircuits alone is maybe currently 6-7%. But of course, so it's not too bad, but of course, it's not many microcircuits. Yeah, it's maybe, 20 or so. Yeah, so this needs to come down. And what kind of kills the performance is really the connections. Yeah. So, I mean, the microcircuits themselves, they fit into a few lookup tables really, and a bunch of flip-flops, but of course they are differently connected, yeah, to kind of normal logic. So if you have to squeeze them in, this is basically where we pay overheads. But we haven't done this particular comparison actually. So this is probably, yeah. Once we've got something impressive working, then I think this is a quantitative analysis that we need to make. Yeah.
Cool. Yep. I think that's all the time we have.
Yeah. So it's kind of.
But let's thank Martin again.